She missed work to care for her sick child. The Black CEO's response left everyone in tears. The cold was a living thing in Alara's apartment. It crept through the thin glass of the single window, a phantom touch against her skin. It settled deep in the worn fibers of the blanket she had wrapped around her son, Leo. His small body was a furnace, radiating a heat that felt wrong, a desperate signal fire in the chill of the room. His breaths were shallow, each one a tiny, ragged flag of surrender. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead again. The heat was a constant, a terrifying hum beneath his skin. The clock on the stove blinked a relentless rhythm. 6:15. She should have been leaving now, pulling on the thin coat that was her only shield against the city's biting wind. She should have been walking the 12 blocks to the bus stop, her stomach a tight knot of anxiety about being late for her probationary period as a cleaner at Advanced Innovations. A new job, a chance, a fragile thread holding them above the abyss. But she could not leave him. Not like this. She looked from Leo's flushed face to the phone on the counter, a stark choice lying between them. A job, or her son. There was no choice at all. Meanwhile, 40 stories above the frozen city, Julian Vance stood before a wall of glass. The view was his kingdom, a sprawling map of lights and shadows under his command. The silence in his office was absolute, a manufactured quiet that cost more than the mahogany desk behind him. It was a silence he had curated, a fortress against a world that had once been too loud with joy, and then too loud with grief. The glass was cold beneath his fingertips. He felt the chill seep into him, an old and familiar friend. It matched the frost that had long ago formed around his heart. On his desk, a sterling silver frame held a photograph of a woman with a radiant smile and a small boy with his father's eyes. The frame was turned slightly away from him, a courtesy to the ghost he could no longer bear to face directly. Sarah, Adam. Their names were echoes in the vast, quiet space of his life. His assistant, Marcus, entered without a sound, placing a tablet on the desk. Morning brief, Mr. Vance. Performance flags are marked in red. Julian nodded, his gaze sweeping over profit margins and project timelines. He was a master of this universe of data and logic. It was clean. It was controllable. Unlike the fragile, unpredictable world of fevers and heartbeats he had lost. Then he saw it. A single red flag in the custodial department. An attendance violation. New hire, probationary period. The name beside the flag was Alara Vance. A coincidence. Nothing more. But the name, his own surname, was a splinter under his skin. It was an unwelcome echo of a life that was no longer his. He felt an irrational spike of irritation. A flicker of something else. He tapped the file, his expression unreadable. Look into this, he said, his voice a low murmur. I want to know why she was absent. It was an order that made no sense. He was the CEO. He did not concern himself with the attendance of the cleaning staff. But the name, and the silence, and the cold glass under his hand had conspired to create a crack in his perfect fortress. Alara's voice was barely a whisper when she called the automated attendance line. My name is Alara Vance. I am calling to report an absence. My son. He is ill. The mechanical voice on the other end did not offer sympathy. It simply recorded her words, her quiet declaration of failure. She hung up the phone, the finality of the act settling in her chest like a stone. She had chosen. Now, she would face the consequences. She spent the day in a hushed vigil. She coaxed spoonfuls of lukewarm broth into Leo's mouth. She wiped his face with a cool, damp cloth. She read to him from his favorite book, the one with the tattered cover and the brave little bear who was never afraid. Her voice was soft, a gentle current in the still, sick air of the room. She had $27 left in the world. She used 10 of it on children's fever reducer from the corner pharmacy. The pharmacist looked at her with pity, and that was worse than the cold. She wanted no one's pity. She had her dignity. It was all she had left. Julian could not shake the name. Alara Vance. It followed him through a morning of conference calls and strategic reviews. A ghost at the table. He dismissed his board of directors and pulled up the file again. It was sparse. An address in a part of the city he only ever saw from his window. No previous employment listed for the past 2 years. A single emergency contact, a social worker whose number was now disconnected. He was looking at the profile of a person on the edge. A person for whom a single missed day of work was not a minor inconvenience, but a potential catastrophe. He remembered Sarah, how she had once missed a crucial gallery opening because Adam had a small cough. "He needs me," she had said simply, as if it were the most obvious law of the universe. Everything else can wait. Julian had built an empire on the principle that nothing waits. You seize the advantage. You press forward. You never, ever stop. He looked at the blurry, low-resolution ID photo of Alara Vance. Her eyes were tired, but there was a straightness to her spine, a set to her jaw that spoke of a resilience he recognized. It was the look of someone who had faced the world and had not yet broken. "Marcus," he said into his intercom, his voice sharper than he intended. "Give me everything you can on her. Discreetly. I want to know her story." Marcus was the best. He moved through the digital world like a wraith, gathering information quietly and efficiently. By afternoon, a new file lay on Julian's tablet. It was worse than Julian had imagined. Evicted 6 months ago after her landlord sold the building. Lived in a shelter for 2 months. Leo's father was not in the picture, a story so common it was a sad cliché. The boy had a recurring bronchial condition, exacerbated by poor living conditions. The job at Vance Innovations was her first steady employment in years. Marcus had also included a link to a public security camera feed from near her apartment building. He had backdated it 2 days. "Watch at the 14:30 mark, sir," his note said. Julian watched. He saw Alara walking home, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He saw an elderly man, one of the city's street sweepers, lose his grip on his cart. Rubbish spilled across the sidewalk. People walked past, annoyed, indifferent. But Alara stopped. She knelt down, without hesitation, and began picking up the discarded papers and plastic bottles, her movements quick and efficient. She said something to the man, and he nodded, a grateful look on his weathered face. She even offered him the small, half-eaten sandwich she pulled from her bag. He refused, but the gesture hung in the air. A small, selfless act in a world of casual cruelty. Julian zoomed in on her face. He saw the weariness there, but he also saw something else. A quiet light. A profound and simple decency. He thought of the untouched plate of artisanal food a private chef had prepared for his lunch, which now sat cold and forgotten. Then Marcus's file delivered its final, devastating blow. He had found a single, private social media page. It had one post from a year ago. A picture of Leo on his 4th birthday, smiling widely, a small cupcake with a single candle in his hands. The caption read, "My brave little bear. My everything." The boy's face. It was not just a resemblance. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile. It was like looking at a photograph of his own son, Adam. A ghost in the machine. The air left Julian's lungs. The fortress of his silence was breached. A wave of grief, so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees, washed over him. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than the cold. He felt a searing, agonizing connection to the pain of a stranger. He could not let her fail. He could not watch another mother fight a losing battle while he sat in his glass tower, a king of ashes. "Marcus," he commanded, his voice thick with an emotion he did not try to hide. "Arrange a grocery delivery to her address. The best of everything. Organic. Fresh. Also, send a top-of-the-line air purifier and a humidifier. And put a rush on it." "Anonymously, sir?" Marcus asked, his own voice soft with understanding. "Yes," Julian said. For now, he told himself it was a strategic decision. A healthy employee was a productive employee. But it was a lie. This was not about his company. This was about the little boy with Adam's smile. It was about the woman with Sarah's quiet strength. It was about the ghost in his heart that had just started to stir. The knock on the door made Alara jump. She never had visitors. She peered through the peephole, her heart pounding. 2 men in uniforms from a high-end grocery store stood in the hallway with boxes stacked high. "Delivery for Alara Vance," one of them said through the door. She opened it a crack. "There must be a mistake. I didn't order anything." "It's all paid for, ma'am," the man said, consulting a tablet. From a well-wisher. They brought in box after box. Food she hadn't been able to afford in years. Fresh fruit, vegetables, milk, juice. Things that felt like impossible luxuries. Then came 2 more boxes. A sleek, white air purifier and a humidifier. Alara stood amidst the bounty, her mind reeling. Who would do this? A church? A charity? It felt like an intrusion, a spotlight on her failure. Kindness from a stranger felt like a debt she could never repay, a weight on her already burdened shoulders. She was suspicious of it. The world had taught her that nothing was free. She unpacked the food, her hands trembling slightly. She plugged in the purifier, and a soft, clean hum filled the small room, a sound so different from the rattling cough of the old radiator. Leo stirred in his sleep, and for the first time, his breathing sounded a little less ragged, a little less strained. A tear escaped her eye, hot and unwelcome. It was a tear of confusion, of gratitude, of fear. But the reprieve was short-lived. That night, the fever returned with a vengeance. Leo's breathing became a desperate, terrifying rasp. His lips had a bluish tint. The sound was a knife in Alara's heart, the sound of a child drowning in air. She didn't hesitate. She bundled him in every blanket she owned and ran into the frozen night, her own thin coat forgotten. She called for an ambulance, her voice cracking with a panic so pure it was primal. The public hospital was a landscape of controlled chaos. The air smelled of antiseptic and despair. The emergency room was overflowing, a chorus of coughs and groans and quiet weeping. Alara stood at the reception desk, Leo a burning weight in her arms. She explained the situation to a nurse whose face was a mask of exhausted indifference. His temperature is 104. He can't breathe, Alara pleaded. Everyone here can't breathe, the nurse said, not looking up from her screen. It's flu season. Take a seat. The wait is about 6 hours. 6 hours? Alara's voice broke. He doesn't have 6 hours. Please, you have to help him. Ma'am, everyone here needs help, the nurse said, her tone final. Take a seat. Desperation clawed at Alara's throat. She felt invisible, powerless. She looked at her son, his small chest heaving, and a fierce, protective rage burned through her fear. She would not let him die in this crowded, indifferent room. Then she remembered. A business card, tucked into the welcome packet from her orientation Advance Innovations. It was for the company's 24/7 employee wellness liaison, a corporate perk that had seemed absurd at the time. A benefit for people with paper cuts and stress headaches, not for people whose worlds were collapsing. With fumbling, frozen fingers, she pulled the card from her wallet and dialed the number. It was a shot in the dark, a prayer to a god she no longer believed in. The call was answered on the first ring. The alert pinged on Marcus's phone with a specific, high-priority tone. He saw the call transcript in real time. Employee, Alara Vance. Location, City General Hospital ER. Dependent, Leo Vance. Critical condition. He was in Julian's office in seconds. Julian was staring out the window, a statue carved from grief. Sir, Marcus said, his voice steady but urgent. It's Alara Vance. Her son is at City General. He's critical. They're making her wait. City General. The name of the hospital struck Julian like a physical blow. It was the same hospital, the same emergency room where he had stood, helpless, as the life faded from his wife and his son. The same indifferent walls, the same smell of antiseptic, the same feeling of a universe spinning out of control. He was frozen. The past was not the past. It was a cold room he had never left. He could hear the frantic beeping of the machines, see the forced, pitying smiles of the doctors. He could feel the weight of Sarah's hand growing cold in his. Sir, Marcus's voice cut through the fog. Julian turned from the window. The ice in his eyes had cracked, revealing a raw, blazing fire beneath. He was not the helpless husband anymore. He was not the grieving father with no power. He was Julian Vance, and his city, his kingdom, would answer to him. He snatched the phone from Marcus's hand. He did not call the front desk. He dialed the personal cell number of the hospital's chief administrator. Henderson. Julian's voice was low, deadly calm. A quiet storm. This is Julian Vance. I am looking at a report that says the son of one of my employees is currently being ignored in your emergency room. His name is Leo. He is 6 years old, and he cannot breathe. There was a frantic sputtering on the other end of the line. He will be in a private room and seen by Dr. Albright, your head of pediatrics, within the next 5 minutes, Julian continued, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Or by morning, I will personally fund a new, state-of-the-art pediatric wing at your competitor's hospital across town. Am I clear? He didn't wait for an answer. He hung up. The silence in his office returned, but it was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with purpose. A terrible, righteous clarity. Get the car, he said to Marcus. We're going to the hospital. In the emergency room, the world shifted on its axis for Alara. One moment, she was a nameless face in a crowd of suffering. The next, a team of doctors and nurses descended upon her. Alara Vance, a man in a white coat, said, his voice kind. I'm Dr. Albright. Let's get him back right now. She was swept through a set of double doors into a clean, quiet, private room. Machines were connected. An oxygen mask was gently placed over Leo's face. The quiet, efficient hum of medical technology replaced the cacophony of the waiting room. Alara was bewildered, dizzy with the sudden change. What happened? How? A nurse smiled at her, a genuinely warm smile. Your boss, Mr. Vance, called himself. He must think you're pretty important. Mr. Vance, the CEO, the faceless man from the top of the tower. Why? Why would he do this? The gratitude she felt was immediately swamped by a wave of something else. A cold, prickling dread. She was a cleaner, a probationary employee who had just missed a day of work. This level of intervention was not normal. It was terrifying. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. A charity case. Her privacy, her quiet struggle, had been breached. This kindness was too big, too powerful. It had strings, she was sure of it. And those strings felt like chains. She sat by Leo's bed, holding his small hand, her heart a tangled mess of relief and fear. The oxygen was working. The rhythmic puff of the machine was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Leo's color was already returning. But her peace was fragile. She was indebted now to a man she didn't know, a man of immense power. And that scared her more than the poverty she had been fighting for years. Julian stood outside the door to Leo's room, a ghost in the hallway of his own past. He could see her through the small glass window. He saw the fierce, protective curve of her back as she leaned over her son. He saw her hand resting on his chest, as if she could will her own strength into his small lungs. It was a scene he had lived 1,000 times. The sterile room, the beeping machines, the desperate, silent prayer of a parent. The love that was so big it was a physical ache in the chest. He saw Sarah in her posture. He saw his own helplessness in the tired lines around her eyes. His grief, usually a frozen ocean within him, was a raging tide. He had to steady himself against the wall. He had come here to take control, to wield his power like a sword. But standing here, he felt as powerless as he had 5 years ago. All his money, all his influence, could not guarantee the next breath of a sick child. He had to see her. He had to. He didn't know what. Apologize for the intrusion? Offer more help. He just knew he couldn't walk away. He pushed the door open softly. Alara looked up, startled. She saw him, and she knew instantly who he was. He was taller than in the corporate photos, his presence filling the small room. He wore an impeccably tailored suit that was worth more than everything she owned. His face was a mask of calm authority, but his eyes held a deep, profound sadness that she recognized. It was the same sadness she saw in her own reflection. She stood up, pulling a shield of formal politeness around herself. It was her only defense. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I thank you. I don't know what to say. You saved my son's life. I'm glad he's getting the care he needs, Julian said, his own voice sounding hollow in his ears. He looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully under the oxygen mask, and the resemblance to Adam was a physical blow. I don't know how I can ever repay you, she said. The words were meant as thanks, but they came out as a dismissal, a boundary line drawn in the sand. I am not your project. I am not your charity. Julian understood. He saw the pride in her eyes, the fear. He had overstepped. He had used a cannon to solve a problem that required a gentle hand. In trying to help, he had made her feel small, powerless. There is nothing to repay, he said softly. He took a half-step back, respecting the line she had drawn. Just focus on him. The company will handle everything. Your job is safe. Her job. The words hung in the air, a reminder of the immense power imbalance between them. He could give or take away her livelihood with a single word. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She turned back to her son, a clear signal that the conversation was over. Julian retreated, closing the door softly behind him. He walked down the sterile hallway feeling more alone than ever. He had saved a child, but he had terrified the mother. He had tried to connect, but had only succeeded in building a higher wall between them. The next day, Leo was stable. The doctors called it a miraculous turnaround. Alara knew it wasn't a miracle. It was money. It was power. It was Mr. Vance. She was discharged with a bag full of expensive medications and an appointment with the city's top pediatric pulmonologist. As she was leaving, a hospital billing administrator intercepted her. "Just wanted to let you know, Miss Vance, your bill has been taken care of in its entirety by your employer. Have a nice day." Another kindness that felt like a cage. When she returned to her apartment, an official courier was waiting with a letter. It was from the Vance Innovations HR department. She opened it with trembling hands, expecting a formal reprimand, a warning. Instead, it was a termination letter. The words were cold, corporate boilerplate. "Due to violations of the company's attendance policy during your probationary period, your employment is terminated, effective immediately." The air rushed from her lungs. It was a cruel, twisted joke. He saves her son's life with one hand and destroys her future with the other. The power he held was absolute, capricious. She sank onto her sofa, the letter fluttering to the floor. The beautiful, expensive air purifier hummed softly in the corner, mocking her. It was all a lie. She was just a game to him, a momentary diversion for a bored, wealthy man. At Vance Innovations, the whispers had already started. They slithered through the cubicles and collected in the break rooms. The cleaner, the one the CEO had personally helped, had been fired. The story twisted and grew ugly with each retelling. She was a fraud. She had faked her son's illness to get the CEO's attention. She was trying to trap him, a gold digger with a sick kid as bait. The HR manager, a petty tyrant named Henderson who felt bypassed by Julian's direct action, had fueled the rumors before issuing the termination, seeing a chance to reassert his authority. Julian heard the whispers when he walked the floor. He saw the smirks, the sideways glances. He felt the poison in the air. When Marcus confirmed that Henderson had fired Alara, citing standard procedure, a cold, controlled fury settled over Julian. Standard procedure had failed. His company, the machine he had built, was rotten with the same indifference as the hospital waiting room. The culture he had created rewarded protocol over people, rules over righteousness. He had failed. He had promised her that her job was safe, and his own company had betrayed him. Betrayed her. He slammed his hand on his desk, the first display of raw emotion Marcus had seen in years. "Call an all-hands meeting," Julian commanded, his voice like ice. The main atrium. Everyone. Now, this was unprecedented. The CEO never addressed the entire company in person, outside of the annual shareholder broadcast. A nervous energy buzzed through the tower as everyone from executives to mailroom clerks gathered in the soaring, marble-floored atrium. Julian stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the sea of faces. His employees, the people who powered his empire. He saw fear, curiosity, arrogance. He began to speak, his voice amplified by the hidden sound system, clear and cold as a winter morning. He did not talk about quarterly earnings or new product launches. He talked about a ghost. 5 years ago, I lost my wife, Sarah, and my son, Adam, he began. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was a part of his life he never, ever spoke of. It was a forbidden topic. They were my world. They were the reason I built all of this. He gestured to the gleaming tower around them. I thought that if I built something powerful enough, I could protect them. I was wrong. He told them about the illness, the endless hospital visits, the feeling of utter helplessness as all the money in the world could not buy one more breath, one more day. I built this company on their memory, he said, his voice cracking, the sound raw and real. But I forgot the most important lesson they taught me. I forgot what it was all for. This company became a monument to my success, but it was an empty one, a fortress of silence. His gaze swept the crowd. Yesterday, an employee of this company, a cleaner named Alara Vance, had to choose between her job and her sick child. She made the right choice. She chose her son, and for that, she was fired. The silence in the atrium was absolute. No one breathed. This was not a failure of HR protocol. Julian's voice rose, filled with a fire that seemed to warm the cold marble. This was a failure of our humanity. A failure of my leadership. We have built a culture where a mother has to fear losing her livelihood to care for her child. That is not a culture of success. It is a culture of fear. And it ends today. Marcus, following Julian's earlier instructions, had established a live video link to a company phone he had couriered to Alara. She was at home, amidst a few pathetic boxes, preparing to run from a life that had become too complicated. She watched the screen, her heart pounding. Effective immediately, I am announcing the Adam Vance Family First Initiative, Julian declared. From this day forward, any employee of Vance Innovations caring for a critically ill family member will be granted unlimited, fully paid leave. No questions asked. No penalties. A wave of murmurs and gasps rippled through the crowd. This initiative will have its own department, its own director. A person to ensure that no one in our corporate family ever feels the desperation and fear that Alara Vance felt, he continued. And I can think of no one more qualified to lead it. The first director of the Family First Initiative will be Alara herself. He named a salary that was 10 times what she had been making. He described a role that was not about charity, but about advocacy, about changing the soul of the company. Her integrity, her quiet dignity, and her devotion to her family are the values this company should have been built on from the start. He finished, his eyes finding the camera that was streaming to Alara. She is the standard we should all aspire to. On her sofa, surrounded by her boxes, Alara watched the face of the CEO. But she didn't see a powerful man anymore. She saw a grieving husband, a heartbroken father, a man who had taken his own immense pain and was trying to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Tears streamed down her face. They were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of release. A great, shuddering catharsis that washed away years of feeling invisible, of being unheard. For the first time in a very long time, she felt seen. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Alara, at first hesitant and overwhelmed, soon found her footing. She moved into a new, warm apartment in a safe neighborhood. Leo, with consistent and excellent medical care, began to thrive. His laughter, once a rare and precious sound, now filled their home. In her new role, Alara was a force of nature. She met with every employee who reached out to the initiative. She listened to their stories, her own past giving her a profound well of empathy. She fought with insurance companies. She arranged for childcare. She became the company's heart, the human connection in a world of data points and profit margins. Julian watched her from a distance at first. He saw the way people's faces lit up when she entered a room. He saw the quiet confidence that now radiated from her. She was not just surviving. She was flourishing. Their interactions were professional, orbiting the work of the initiative. But slowly, a different kind of connection began to form. It started with sharing coffee in the hospital cafeteria while visiting another employee's sick child. It grew during late-night brainstorming sessions in her new, comfortable office. He learned about the little things. Her love for old books. The way she hummed softly when she was concentrating. She learned about him, too. She saw the man behind the CEO title. A man who carried a deep well of sadness, but who also had a quick, dry wit and a surprising gentleness. One evening, he came to her apartment to drop off some paperwork. Leo, healthy and energetic, ran to him without hesitation. "Will you read me the story about the brave bear?" he asked, holding up the tattered book. Julian froze. It was Adam's favorite book. He looked at Alara, his eyes asking for permission. She nodded softly. He sat on the floor, and with Leo curled up beside him, he read the familiar words. His voice was thick with emotion, but he did not stop. In that small, warm living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the air purifier he had sent, a fragile piece of his frozen heart began to thaw. A new routine was born. Quiet dinners, walks in the park. Julian became a fixture in their small world. He was no longer Mr. Vance, the powerful benefactor. He was Julian, the man who knew how to fix Leo's favorite toy, the man who listened, really listened, when Alara talked about her day. One crisp autumn afternoon, he took them to the cemetery. They stood before two simple granite headstones. "Sarah Vance, Adam Vance. I wanted to introduce you," Julian said softly, his hand finding Alara's. Sarah, Adam, this is Alara. And this is Leo. He looked at the cold stone. I think you'd like them. They brought the light back. Alara squeezed his hand, her own quiet tears falling for the family he had lost, and for the one they were slowly, carefully building. A year to the day after Julian's speech in the atrium, the company held the first gala for the Family First initiative. The room was filled with employees whose lives had been touched by the program. It was a celebration of hope, of a company that had found its soul. Julian stood at the podium, giving the keynote address. He spoke of the initiative's success, of the lives changed. He thanked his team. Then his eyes found Alara, standing near the front, her face glowing with a quiet pride. He stopped speaking. The room fell silent, sensing a shift. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly to her. The crowd parted like the sea. He stood before her for a moment, his gaze so intense it felt like the only two people in the universe were them. Then he dropped to one knee. A collective gasp filled the ballroom. He didn't hold out a diamond ring. Instead, he opened his hand. In his palm lay a small, worn, tarnished brass key. It was the key to her old, cold apartment, which Marcus had retrieved for him months ago. You opened a door in my life that I thought was locked forever, he said, his voice soft but carrying in the silence. You taught me how to feel again. You and Leo, you are my home. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Alara Vance, would you, and Leo, would you be my family? Tears of pure joy streamed down Alara's face. She could only nod, unable to speak. Yes, she finally whispered. Yes. Leo, who had been watching from the side, let out a whoop of joy and ran forward, throwing his arms around both of them. Julian pulled them into a hug, a man no longer defined by his loss, but by the incredible love he had found. The room erupted in thunderous applause, a wave of heartfelt emotion for the family that had been forged in the crucible of kindness. Their wedding was not a grand affair. It was held in the garden of the home they now shared, under the gentle shade of an old oak tree. The only guests were Marcus, who stood as Julian's best man, and Leo, who served as the proudest ring-bearer in the world. Julian watched Alara walk toward him, not as a woman he had saved, but as the woman who had saved him. She was not the downtrodden, invisible cleaner from the city's forgotten corners. She was a queen, radiant and strong, the center of his world. Alara looked at Julian, seeing not the powerful, detached CEO from the glass tower, but her kind, gentle husband. A man who had seen her at her lowest and had not offered pity, but respect. A father to her son, the missing piece of her own heart. They exchanged simple vows, promises of a future built not on wealth or status, but on shared understanding, quiet moments, and the unshakable belief in second chances. As they kissed, a ray of sunlight broke through the leaves of the tree, bathing them in a warm, golden light. They were whole. They were home. They were a family. This story teaches us that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in empathy. It shows that behind every corporate title and every struggling stranger, there is a human heart with its own story of loss and hope. A single act of seeing someone in their moment of need, of choosing compassion over protocol, can set in motion a miracle that heals not just one life, but many. It reminds us that family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we build through love, respect, and unwavering kindness. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion, please take a moment to show your support. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to the world. We invite you to like this video, share it with someone who might need a message of hope, and subscribe to our channel, Soul-Stirring Stories, for more inspirational content. Click the notification bell so you never miss a story that can lift your spirits and warm your soul. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing in the quiet miracles that surround us every day.